Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. It is said nature abhors a vacuum, and in regard to vaping regulations in Canada, this maxim appears to hold true. In the wake of the teen vaping epidemic and concern over the so-called vaping-related lung illness, provincial governments across the country have taken matters into their own hands by issuing a patchwork of new vaping restrictions intended to fill regulatory gaps left open by Health Canada. The BC provincial government is the latest to drop a slew of new restrictions that are certain to change the way vaping products are produced, sold, and consumed in the province. Joining us today, and by a phoner is what they call it, to do a deep dive on the regulations and to provide analysis is Darryl Tempest, the Canadian Vaping Association's Executive Director and Lead Advocate. Darryl, thanks for coming back on RegWatch.
Thank you so much for having me, Brent.
Oh, no, it's great. And obviously a lot has been going on in terms of CVA, from what I understand, working at least with the BC provincial government on these regs. Could you fill our audience in on that a little bit more?
So when the government first came out with their intention paper, which is similar to what we've seen at a federal level, they had specific agenda items that they wanted to be able to accomplish. So they had a strategy of what they thought would address the youth uptake issue. And hadn't given a ton of thought into how that was going to impact the industry. So actually, government reached out in BC to ask how those that 10-point plan that they put forth originally was going to impact industry, and they've been very responsive and have taken in a lot of information about what standardization looks like in the industry and how that should be applied to their vision of what regulation should look like for vaping products.
So when CVA looked at the regulations that dropped on Monday, what was your first response? The concern for many was that if the 10-point plan was, implemented the way that it was proposed, it could have been an industry killer. Well, would have been.
Well, the original one would have been for sure. And not only were we able to present at the level of the health minister, but also we were able to put a lot of information into the bureaucracy, which I think is an industry. Everyone sees the health minister; they're the ones on TV and are making the announcements. But the bureaucracy is critically important because they do a lot of the legwork that goes into regulations, and they're the ones who actually try to pull together things like label restrictions or information on tank size, for example. So as we move forward and we saw what came out on Monday, some of the things that we saw that they really took our the industry's opinion on, specifically around the CVA, was the 10 milliliter bottle to 30 milliliter bottles, understanding that there is no market for 10 milliliter bottles. And the theory and thought process that went into that, it certainly wouldn't achieve what they were looking for because, they were trying to say, we don't want this to be inexpensive for youth. And then, putting it in a product that in a bottle size that's so tiny that it would have the least amount of cost. Right. So they really took a lot of pragmatic understanding there. I think where they're going here, Brent, is, and I think there's still lots of opportunity for improvement as we move forward because they're really building this on the UK model. And we're still helping them understand the significant differences between the UK model and the Canadian model and how the federal regulations also overlay with provincial regulations.
So walk us through the key things that you think were decent in terms of the restrictions.
Well, first and foremost, and we've talked about this a lot, the biggest change in the market that had Canadians and Canadian politicians concerned about vaping was when we are going through youth uptake. So, and I know you're doing a show tomorrow to talk about a lot of the fundamental flaws in regards to Hammond's report. And you and I have both talked about the complete joke of the youth uptake study in Nova Scotia. But if you kind of move forward from that, what we do like is that this wasn't meant to be advertised like crazy in Hockey Night in Canada and on billboards and every corner store. This was tailored for 5 million Canadian smokers. So aligning with the federal government on that is, we think, every province should do, and every province has followed that. What I also liked is the fact that the minister identified, and only the second minister in Canada so far that's identified vaping as a harm reduction tool. Right. So, and that's, Brent, you've been covering this a long time. Getting politicians to publicly recognize vaping as a harm reduction tool is a massive win for the industry.
Do you think the health ministers, the actual regulations, though, and the approach match, that statement in terms of harm reduction, or is it just fluff? And I think that's a fair question.
I know it's a fair question. So I'm going to take you back. And as you know, I have the privilege to be able to represent the Canadian Vaping Association, its board and its members, with every government. Right. And I think you and I have talked about this a few times. The government right now is not having a conversation about harm reduction. It's all about youth uptake.
Right.
That's all they want to talk about. And you and I have covered that at length. What I think here is that when the industry started to develop, it developed without regulation. So if you talk about bottle size and vaping devices and all of these items, it grew really organically. But the industry also wanted acceptance from the federal government to ensure that they weren't operating in the gray. With that becomes a responsibility to start to work with regulators, and they're going to have very different ideas than the industry norms. So, for example, where we saw here was when we made the case about 30 mil, 60 mil, and 120 mil bottles, they agreed that 10 mil bottles don't follow any industry practice, but there's no way I could convince them that consumers needed 60 or 120 mil bottles for harm reduction. Buy 2 bottles.
Well, and explain their thinking for us, because you're the only one that's got that kind of closeness to it. Like, how could they not understand that? Because if you're an old school vapor, you're not using salt. You do blow through 120 pretty quick.
I would agree with that. I don't think that when we go to data points, that's where they're looking, right? That we need to be able to show that in terms of supporting harm reduction, that there's a reason that someone needs a 120 mil bottle versus 30, right?
Right.
Where we really focused was and Brent, you and I talked in November when we started. When we walked through the door, it was a full flavor ban, 10 mil bottles, and no marketing.
And no marketing. So, and just for the sake of making sure we do this up front, so the 10 mil bottles, that's squeaked into 30, which as a vapor myself here in British Columbia, thank you for the 30 because it's doable. Certainly with if you're vaping salt. But then let's leave the nicotine conversation elsewhere. So, I mean, so if it's 30 and people can live with that, I mean, obviously it's going to cost people more because you don't have the economies of scale buying in, larger bottles worth. But, that said, 10's an industry killer. So great. So explain to our viewers the detente on flavors.
I'm sorry, you broke up there for a sec. The detente flavors?
That's right, exactly, because there's been a detente that has been reached, I think.
Oh, okay.
That's assuming that one side has any say in the matter, which I'm not certain we do. But yeah, there was definitely something has happened with flavors. Explain that for our audience.
So, and I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So I hear a lot from concerned consumers and retailers and manufacturers about this perception that we negotiate with government. We advocate with government.
Right.
That's all you can do is advocate. That we don't have a magic stick where if we disagree with what they're saying, we have only one option, which is legal battles, which, as we've seen in Quebec, can take anywhere from 3 to 4 years and cost anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 at provincial level, and well over $1 million at a federal level. Okay, so let's sit that there and dig into more of the point. So originally, the thought process from the provincial government was that that flavors were attracting youth and had no impact on the success rates for conversion from smoking combustible tobacco to vaping. After a great deal of conversation with many representatives at different levels of the government in BC, they have understood that access to flavors is critical for harm reduction and for conversion of smokers to vapors.
Right.
And that allowing this, and we saw this in Ontario, Brent, as you know, that these should be an adult-only access environment. Therefore, if you look at future developing regulations, we're going to have to put in things like ID scanners and online tools to make sure that youth don't get access, because it's not just about vapors. We fit within society as a larger context. So right now, and I'm not going to speak for the minister, but I have every confidence that that flavors within that adult only access environment are going to continue. They're building off of models that we've seen in Ontario specifically, and I'll always give Ontario a ton of
Props.
applause.
Yeah.
For how they've done it, because where they went through is that they were the first ones to register product vape shops. And even better was that they were able to put that through what they call the local health integration network, or the LINs. And what happens in those LINs is that now you are working with health officials, right? So you can see how vaping is now starting to finally, after 2 years of just absolute attacks, being able to shift back to what we are, which is a harm reduction tool in the health field.
Right.
Right.
So
We
obviously,
not,
let me just quickly point out, Darryl, that within that realm, it's so important then the frontline healthcare workers, the frontline public health workers are on board. So it sounds like there's been movement in Ontario. Do you think there's movement in BC? Because BC seems to be, pretty stringent in terms of their kind of anti-vaping attitude at the public health level.
I would say at the public health level, we still have a ton of work to do. It's been very interesting to understand and watch how elected officials have got there so much faster than public health officials. So we have far more partners in elected seats across this country and in British Columbia than we do in the public health realm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So when you put Ontario and BC up against each other, I'm assuming Ontario is the better set of regulations.
Certainly, and one of the things, and it's a misconception. So, we talk a lot about data points, and if I could paint a picture for the audience, is that so little research is done on the core drivers of youth vaping. It's mostly just made up statistics of informal conversations. On the other side, there's been very little research done to really drive home why flavors are so important. And Brett, you and I have talked about the limbic system before, but there's no pure studies on that in terms of, and we all know that flavors are the key, but there's no set of peer-reviewed studies that really drive that home in a way that government has accepted it, right? So as we kind of move forward, what we said, and we've said this to every government across Canada, in our opinion, Ontario has the best platform because you still have high nicotine levels available for heavy smokers. But we know about what we know about product vape shops is that nicotine reduction is always part of their client regime. Right? It's not, they don't want people on 59 milligrams, and it can be quite harsh sometimes. I know when I used to vape high nicotine products, I was like, I get like a headache and things like that. But I think more importantly is that if you go back to before 2018, and I've seen a ton of comments, Brent, out in in Facebook and Twitter, that said, like, in 2017 and 2016 and 2015, I didn't sell anything over 24.
Right.
Right. And last year, Sam and I did our national tour, and Sam is the president of the Canadian Vaping Association, for those who don't know him.
Yeah, and he was just on the show last week, if you recall.
Oh, that's right. He was just on the show. Yeah, thank you. So we went to every province and did anywhere between 1 to 2 industry meetings in every major city. And when I asked people who sold anything over 20 milligrams per milliliter prior to 2017, in all those meetings, I had 2 people raise their hands. 2.
Well, I'm a bit uncertain on how to follow that, because I do have the personal experience myself of being a former smoker and a vapor. And, for me, I mean, all I buy is 48 or 50 milligrams salt here in British Columbia at like my home vape shop that saved my life. And now I have not actually made a phone call to them yet because, quite frankly, this is a sad thing because of the nicotine issue. This regulation cuts my nicotine in half. And so the idea could be as well, maybe you shouldn't be using that much nicotine, but that's what I use.
But here's the concern though, Brent, for me, because I hear you, right? I absolutely hear you. And that's why the Ontario model, it really is the best model. But here's the big thing I think that we faced, right? If it's not nicotine levels for the vast majority, then it's flavors. And everyone turned on flavors. And if the industry nationally in Canada loses flavors, the conversion rate for those millions of smokers out there will be greatly impacted. So we are going back to British Columbia to ask that we can get studies done on how nicotine concentration levels can help from harm reduction. So we can move those products like we did in Ontario into those adult environments and reintroduce them. If that takes 4 months or 6 months, I think we're on a long journey, right? And what's going to happen is a lot of reformed smokers such as yourself are going to be forced to buy online or buy from a different province. I understand that it's certainly not convenient, and you have to plan your product purchases a lot more. It's not something we suggested. What we say is there's only 2 data points, and the US was really a big driver for this, right? You put a bunch of high nicotine products across 150,000 stores and with no education or no understanding, and youth uptake went nuts down there. Like, it really did go nuts. And then you look
has it ever been, has the data point on that, and excuse me for interrupting, because I haven't actually heard this whether or not, because we know that it's the Juul, or was the Juul, and other similar products that really were the problem. I've not heard that it was like, just a regular salt in an open system, or do I have that wrong? Is there data points out there that says open systems using high nic, salt that's bought at a specialty vape shop or something like that has been the problem, or was it not the closed systems?
No, and I agree with you. You try to stay away from brand specific for the most part, but let's call a spade, right? Juul they called it Juuling. It had the largest market share. And it was the one that was absolutely took over the social media pathway, right? Mm-hmm. It's also what politicians understand. So if you look at where we stood in October of last year, which was a absolute nightmare scenario, until the federal election, vaping was the only conversation nationally. And even through COVID, the second trending conversation nationally is still vaping to this day. But what I'm starting to hear, and as we're turning corners, right? I did an interview in Kamloops where I had the gentleman who was interviewing me saying, "A Valley was not nicotine product.
Sorry,
Vape shops are not.
right.
A Valley was not nicotine products. Vaping is not Juul, and it is harm reduction." I did that same interview 4 months ago where they asked me why I'm trying to addict kids to nicotine.
Right.
Right. So we're rebuilding the industry. Right. And that's where my earlier comments was we were a cottage industry before. We had access to certain products and we knew certain amounts. So, 30 mils, 60 mils, why wasn't it 50 mils and 70 mils? Right. It's because that's what the industry started to standardize around. Government is going to standardize us now that we're a regulated product. Right. But where I see the opportunities is where specifically with BC is they said, here's exactly what we're thinking about in the regs, but we need industry stakeholders to come in and help us finish them off, which would never been an opportunity before. And the other thing, like if I look at it sort of broad picture, I think getting rid of 0 milligram per milliliter vape juice is asinine. I truly do. I've made that quite clear to the government. It makes no sense to me. But we have to understand there's other stakeholders besides us. So what did the minister hear from a bunch of stakeholders at the youth level?
Right.
I like to blow clouds. I don't care about the nicotine, right? I like the flavor. I don't care about the nicotine. So as we walk through harm reduction, if you see the pathway for vaping long term, is that we have to engage with harm reduction specialists and get them on our side, which has still been a massive struggle. We have to get clinicians and cancer experts who deal with pulmonary lung disease on our side, and we need to continue to do what we're doing now. And it's my expectation of the government of British Columbia and the federal government is that they have to back the real studies. So, and not the garbage that we saw in Nova Scotia, because that is an absolute travesty of misinforming your electorate and your citizenship. An absolute travesty. And I'm excited to see them in court to put that in front of a judge.
No, and that certainly. Anytime. It's so difficult to hold any of these researchers, even public health, who make statements about vaping that we know are erroneous. How do you hold them account? So, any steps and moves that's being done to do that is very good. Let's move back to a couple of more of the little, not little, but issues stuff. I want to talk about packaging. After we do that, we're going to watch one of the CTV clips that was released on Monday and just get a sense of kind of the flavor, pardon the pun, in which that they use language to describe vaping. And here when they're dropping the regs. So anyhow, but on packaging, so it appears to me that we're going to have plain packaging. So we know what that looks like on a pack of cigarettes. We know what it looks like in other cases. How are we talking like brown paper bag here kind of thing? What are we going to see on the packaging?
Well, and you're catching me early on in the process, Brent. Right?
Okay.
What I can tell you now is that there are ongoing conversations for sure on how to make this work. The CVA's position is quite clear that the new federal guidelines are essentially plain packaging. That it's going to put a lot of BC companies at a disadvantage, especially on the manufacturing side. But I think the key here is that with the time, so originally the thought process, I think, from government was that they wanted all the regulations to go live I think that the minister and the bureaucracy got together and have given time to have these conversations, to look at templates that make sense. So if I think about how we went through our experience with labeling with the federal government, there was very little input that they took from industry. I mean, we put a lot of effort into it, and almost every suggestion that we had was either completely ignored and none of it commented on. I see a difference in the BC government in terms of how they want to approach this with industry. They want a lot more input. They want to understand. You got to remember, in their mind, it's still, all those poor players who put Oreos on their packaging and butterflies and unicorns. And Brent,
But
if
sure, I
you
mean, but
ever
let me just interrupt. I mean, that is now years ago and totally taken care of in the federal regs. So I mean, to me, that's astonishing that they would still be talking about gummy bears and stuff and cotton candy flavors, and on the labels, right? Like, I mean, it's just
we hear it. No, we hear it so perception is reality, right?
true.
Right. I think that's one
Yeah.
thing we can agree on. So I still hear it in almost every media interview I do to this day. I hear it from politicians to this day. So an old mentor of mine who is a great politician said, if you say it enough times so you can puke in your mouth, that's the first time your audience has heard it. So we're on the side that understands the file, but we continue to draft messaging targeted. So we email MLAs and MPs and media all week, every week. We've been doing it for months to educate them on the file. That doesn't mean that they read it, understand it, or agree. I mean, prejudice is prejudice, right? Bias is bias. During COVID, we'd asked for vape shops to be put forth as a essential service to make sure that people had access to their problems or to the nicotine that they required, not to return to smoking. And like I have, 40 or 50 responses of, "You got to be kidding. Drop dead. You don't have my support."
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, all right. So I need you to kind of, so with packaging, you're saying potentially there might be some room to move there.
Yep.
You're just getting started on that.
Getting started.
Get used to 30 ml bottles because there was some kind
that's a done deal.
That's a done deal. Good news that for the majority of flavors, they're still safe at specialty retail, adult only stores. However, the nicotine is capped at 20 milligrams.
At 20 milligrams. Yeah. And that's not going to change either.
And that's not going to change.
No, not anytime soon.
Okay. So, and let me just ask one question on that. And, and I think we'll have put nicotine to bed. Considering what happened in Ontario, what's now happened in BC, and we know that the health groups, are really pushing Alberta government to really follow BC's lead. They're really pumping BC up as, something to emulate. And so if that's being the case, maybe that then nicotine cap will happen in other provinces too as well. And we're talking about here, the kind of the killer is that it's happening at the specialty retail. If in your mind, and I'm asking this from everybody here, did CVA make a mistake advocating for that cap or not being specific about that cap being solely for convenience?
No. The fight in this country was over flavors. So, and I've been clear with everyone on this, is that what changed in the marketplace in 2018? What changed was high nic companies came in and splashed us around everywhere and ruined an industry.
Right.
Right. Our data points tell us in the UK, no youth uptake. And I get people are going to say, well, there's short fills and there's other products. But kids aren't going through that pathway.
Right.
They just don't have the same upswing that we saw in the United States, period. I think more importantly is if the vast majority of success in conversion for vapors whether that worked for you or whether that worked for me, Brent, if you look at the sales data from across the country, year over year over year, was 3, 6, and 12.
Right.
And if we lose flavors at a national level, if we like Nova Scotia, they're closing up shop, right? They got the worst. They got 20 milligram cap and no flavors. What happens if that happens nationally?
Right.
There is no data, and I've put out a ton of press releases on this. 80% of youth have identified through the CDC that they picked up vaping for curiosity. Oh, and by the way, the sun's going to come up tomorrow.
Right.
Right? But when you're dealing with regulators and you're advocating, not negotiating, but when you're advocating, if they dig in their heels, the only pathway you have is legal. And it takes years and it takes millions of dollars. Try to get that from an industry that's shut down.
So let me ask you about the patchwork process here then. And, we've brought this up a lot, obviously, from day one, because we thought vaping was made legal. We thought that it was a national framework. It's federal. Everybody was working together. And of course, we have this epidemic issue that popped up. And we can throw our hands up and say, we just have to take that, but there's going to be a disruption. But there's still, from a political and economic and, civil society point of view, is that you have to trust science and you have to trust regulators. And when they create a brand new framework, if they create a brand new framework in order to make something legal, and then just to be able to really unroll that framework within months after it becoming law, and then not doing enough, and then the provinces have off and they're all doing their own separate thing. This really is a mess. It doesn't matter in my mind with regard to this being about vaping. If you were to look at any emerging industry that, is an important industry that's growing fast, saving lives, whatever it is, it's having an impact, positive mostly, on the community. And the federal government goes through a multi-year process costing millions of dollars to review the products, to review the science, to get all of the input in, to put together laws, make it law, and then to just have it all unravel months later. And any product, any industry should be furious over something like this. And I understand direct legal challenges, but we have to trust our regulators when they actually implement regulation, that they're going to stick by it. Partially here, Health Canada has not stood by their assessment of the science. They've just been quiet.
I don't think we can jump to that conclusion. I think
then why not?
I think that they're doing it in their in a time frame that works for them.
But their time frame, though, Darryl, is what's left the gaps open for the provinces to step in and do their own thing.
Okay, so let's break this down in kind of 3 chunks. Okay, sure. So the first chunk is, normally in every industry, the feds, especially when it comes to GMP manufactured products, have regulations that deal with manufacturing and usually leave distribution to the provinces.
Okay.
In our case, the 2 ones that make the most sense and have the most like to our industry is cannabis and alcohol. The feds manage the manufacturing regulations and the provinces deal with distribution. What's changed is, and you and I talked about this earlier in this interview, was perception is reality. So what happened was vaping became a runaway train. Health Canada is not going to put out regs that they don't, that they can't articulate in a legal way, because they're as worried about lawsuits as anyone else. So they took their time. But meanwhile, every soccer parent or someone who has a concern about vaping or seen the kids, and we got to own a bit of this, vaping around the back door of their high school, that happened, right? Those are real things. So that perception then became the reality, and then the provinces started to jump, and they're pushed by media as much as anyone else. And I close it with this statement: I'm watching as a Canadian what's happening as it relates to COVID. I'm watching friends fight about whether masks make sense, whether they don't. I'm watching media with all kinds of crazy stories of all over the place. Uh, Half the people agree on one pathway. The science says this, then the science says that. Science says nicotine is good for COVID, but then you got to talk about the smoking. Like, it becomes so muddled at that level as a
Sure.
comparable
Yeah.
that we didn't realize when the industry had said, and remember, it's a young industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it really is comparative to pretty much every other industry there is. Uh, the mom and pops and the small manufacturers were all about harm reduction, and they wanted to make it fun, and they wanted to make it so that people felt good about what they were doing and that they were reducing their harm. And almost like all of them were reformed smokers. I haven't talked to an entrepreneur yet in the industry that wasn't a smoker at one point in their life,
Right.
right? So we saw this, but then it became a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a $1.2 billion industry in Canada today,
I know.
right? Which is insane if you consider where it was in 2016. So we became a target.
True.
And when everyone wanted the attention of government, government wouldn't pay attention to us. And we're like, hey, we're a harm reduction tool. We're doing a really great job. We want you to see the studies. But what you're finding is that regulations are going to have ups and downs. And I know every entrepreneur out there is like, this is how I feed my children and my family. And I totally get that. The best thing that we can do is continue to push for progress. And what we're seeing is Nova Scotia, Brent,
Yes.
would not entertain a meeting,
He-
a phone call,
Uh,
a study, a report, a common sense approach, nothing. We might not like everything that we've seen in BC. There's lots of things there that I don't like. But what I can tell you is they engaged, there's continual dialogue, they've reviewed tons of documentation,
mm-hmm.
they have an agenda, they're in control. But at the end of the day, if you took what our experience was in Nova Scotia or what we are going to face in Quebec, which is going to be scary, and then you look at BC, they've done a very good job. Don't like it all, but there's other provinces out there that are hell bent on killing the industry, period. Done the day I talk.
Wow.
I'm going to sign the regs and you're over. And that's what happened in Nova Scotia. And we project some very tough times in the province of Quebec, similar to what we see in Nova Scotia.
So let's let me just ask you about Alberta. Is it as bleak? Do you see a future as bleak there? Because the government's a bit squishy. We know that.
Actually, I think that the government in Alberta has really stood tall. To the point where these 26 doctors, unbelievable to me. These 26 doctors asked the Lieutenant Governor General to not sign the vaping bill that came through from the Alberta government. So the doctors and the Cancer Society, and they want to suspend Parliament or parliamentary procedure completely and take away the power from the premier, the minister, and the elected officials from all of the people in Alberta, and said, like, listen, these guys obviously are out of touch. They don't know what they're doing because should be a nanny state, and let's suspend democracy. Right?
In the middle of COVID and what they've done, public health, I'm not surprised. There's nothing surprising there that they want to just strip people.
It wasn't public health. It was the doctors. But the problem was it was endorsed by the chief medical officer, which is a huge concern. But it was ignored. It was completely ignored.
You know where I stand on this issue. I believe muscles were exercised during epidemic and vaping-related lung illness that were then used in COVID. Whether they're connected or not, they were muscles that government and and nanny state warriors were using. So let's jump for a second. Go ahead, Darryl, and then we're going to go to this.
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to be careful. I'm not comparing COVID and vaping.
No.
I need to. Yeah. All I was saying was you could see the media hype really push decision making, right?
Sure.
And I'm not advocating for masks or against masks or for social distancing or whatever. I'm not a clinician. I don't know what the hell I'd be talking about anyway.
I mean, like COVID's like stinging nettles. You just try to stay away from it as much as you can in a show, unless you're doing something at like 2 a.m, on a Saturday night on YouTube, unlisted. Anyhow.
Okay.
So we've got a clip queued up from Monday, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's Monday. The CTV on the island, Vancouver Island. So we went straight to the heart of progressive, hippie people that all on the island. So let's have a quick take of this. 1 sec. Hopefully the audio will work. And no, it's not. That's
BC launched a widespread assault on vaping.
Okay, so I'm going to just stop it there for a second. A widespread assault on vaping, the BC government did. And now to take the other side here, to take kind of the rosy look at things, it certainly wasn't an assault on vaping in terms of as bad as it could be, but it's being framed still for the viewer as being, very draconian. Let's go back to listen here.
COVID-19 crisis, the province is about to take aim at another healthcare emergency. Today, BC launched a widespread assault on vaping, especially when it comes to youth. CTV's Scott Cunningham has more on some industries that say they're being unfairly targeted.
Okay. Grape is always a good flavor as well.
Whether you're going for flavor or just the kick of an e-cigarette or vape, the buzz in BC is about to change.
Nicotine in particular is highly addictive, and what we've seen is an aggressive campaign over time to promote the use of vaping products among youth.
In one of the most forceful moves against vaping in Canada, BC today enacts its Vaping Action Plan.
Even young adults, not necessarily kids, but young adults are winding up in hospital with lung damage because of it.
At its core, it caps nicotine levels at 20 milligrams per pod, the same as 20 cigarettes. Non-nicotine and cannabis blends are banned. Advertising is prohibited anywhere a child could see it. Flavored products must be sold in vape-specific shops. And it launches a large youth education program.
All of this is to say that students in BC that want to make healthy choices have the resources they need to talk to the people around them about vaping.
As BC health officials have seen at least 3 serious lung illnesses related to vaping, stamping out youth smoking is a key focus here.
I hang out with kids who vape, and they're always like, oh, what flavor? Oh, it's mango. It's like, oh, that's sick.
What are some of the products that are restricted that you're already selling?
Well, we sell tobacco, we sell lottery. In some provinces, we sell beer and wine.
Not everyone is pleased by the vape crackdown. An organization representing Canadian convenience stores is disappointed with BC, saying corner shops should get the right to sell flavored products.
We are proven responsible retailers. We have a strong track record of selling a whole host of age-restricted products.
It has a lot of really good true fruit flavors.
Meanwhile, vape-only stores with ID policies are pleased as they will soon corner the flavored market.
There's nothing to be sold in a vape store that's for anyone under the age of 19.
While there may be a retail rift, BC's tough on the puff legislation is in effect today, with some shops getting until September 15th to clear out restricted product. Scott Cunningham, CTV News, Victoria.
So there's a bunch of things there, Darryl, for us to chat about. What are your thoughts overall in a piece like that? Because you certainly have seen a lot of pieces and been involved in a lot too as well. Well,
yeah, I look at these close to an hour and a half to 2 hours every day from coast to coast. If I made $1 for every lazy report that I've ever seen, I would be a very wealthy man. But if you start breaking down what's there, is that vaping has an amazing viewer rate for media. I get all the reports and really break it down. So for them to really focus on what they focus on this full time is like, oh, we got to talk about the youth and mango and the flavors, never once mentioning the fact that the minister highlighted harm reduction. The minister highlighted for adults, for adult use, and therefore it should only be adult access. Right? They chop it up, and then they'll find someone. And Brent, like sometimes my interviews go 20, 25 minutes, and they'll use that one sentence that fits their narrative.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
The media is very anti-vape. I'm going to harken back to what I think was really one of the most important things that I would like to leave you and the listeners with is this. It's not representative of the response that we've gotten back from the government. If they banned flavors, they would have got kudos from the Canadian Cancer Society and from, all the health advocate groups. Pick whoever you want. This is what's going to save the children, and not talk once about the impact it's going to have on adults. So I think when we look at the regulations that they put through, this is what that government believes is going to have the best impact on youth.
So, and if I get that right, it's the opportunity to have won lots of brownie points with a whole bunch of people that are loud and have influence, i.e., doctors and public health employees and, nonprofit health groups and parents and teachers and all of the politicians and everything else. So, I mean, it would have been just an easy win for the BC government to have just banned flavors like Nova Scotia had done. Yeah, and taken that, and they didn't. And by not doing that and mentioning harm reduction so clearly from the minister, that has some daylight there. There's sunlight there. There is something there.
And the opportunities are growing. So the other thing that we're seeing is that as the industry is becoming more technical, for example, marketing regulations coming down from the feds, labeling regulations coming down from the feds, the provinces are now reaching out more to say, how can you help me understand my goals as a province and make sure that they align with the federal regulations?
Mm-hmm.
Because they do this stuff all the time. So they realize they could put something into law that if they can't supersede the federal law.
And in the end too, they don't want to get sued, right? Like why isn't CVA suing the BC government? Is there not enough there to sue them, or is it just lawsuits as we've seen in Quebec are just horrible?
So I'll break down. I get this question a lot, Brent, and actually it's a really good question. So thank you for asking it. So that we work with a series of constitutional lawyers across the country. I've had certainly a decent amount of experience with constitutional law in my career. One of the things I'll tell you is that injunctions are very rarely actually successful. Like we're talking 1 in 1,000. Okay.
Yeah.
2, when it comes to the constitutional portion of the law, is that what did they take away? Right? You have to be able to prove that over 20 milligrams is going to have a negative health impact on people. And you have to prove that in court, which means studies, scientific proof, peer-reviewed work, all of these things that don't exist. And we can't pick and choose what we like from the UK. The UK has 3.5 million vapors, huge success, at a 20 milligram craft.
Right. So if it's a harm reduction argument, you would have to be arguing that 20 milligrams is detrimental to harm reduction and it has to be more. And then you're arguing in the weeds on harm reduction and more nicotine. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and the only country that's got behind the research is the one that has 20 milligram cap. Right. So now, right? So that law, or to be able to challenge that in a legal platform, is extremely challenging. right? Now, what's the difference between BC and Nova Scotia? Nova Scotia is that you can present a very strong case that says that flavors are a key element based on these specific peer-reviewed studies. So, and then the last piece people talk to me about all the time is taxation. If you take the time to research legal challenges and constitutional challenges around taxation, they have less success than anything. Like the judicial is very careful not to mess around with taxation. And so, it's not just because their opinion differs from yours and they're like, okay, I'm going to raise $300,000 and then suddenly everything's going to go my way. Brent, we're in our 3.5 years into Quebec, and we still aren't through the appeal process.
Yeah, we had a win. And I mean, I use we, obviously.
Not only was it the first constitutional win for vaping globally, but it was the single strongest win for harm reduction in Quebec history. Because I've been trying and got the legal team to try to find another harm reduction argument to help support ours and prepare for the event of a flavor ban. And when we went through it, there was the strongest win for harm reduction in Quebec history was actually our own case.
Let me jump us here, Darryl, to a couple of, because we're getting close here on the end, and I've got a couple of killer questions I want to ask you. So before we do that, I've got some viewer questions here, and I want to thank our senior producer, Cindy Schmidt, for passing these along. So 2 questions here. And so I'm going to ask them both, and then you can give us a quick answer. So, and this is from a question from FB. Confectionery and dessert flavors, are they completely gone? And then the second question was to clarify the 2 mil limit. Is that closed pods only, or is that for tanks too as well? So confectionery and dessert flavors, are they completely gone? Confectionery is, because you can't have confectionery based on.
They follow the federal guidelines.
But what about dessert flavors? Like, I mean, is dessert totally gone too from federal? I can't call if it was labeled dessert.
No, they're not. And there's no definition of it. So to answer the question directly, and Brent, I'm happy to come on the show in a couple of weeks to help people with this. There's not a lot of definition right now.
Right.
So within a couple of weeks, I will have more definite answers. I'm not concerned about any flavors that aren't. I'm not concerned about any flavors at this point.
Okay.
Where I think the language that needs to be changed on the regulatory side, and there'll be conversations about this, is they're really trying to get to naming conventions. That's where I think that they kind of misunderstood a lot of the information that they had. So I'm not overly concerned at this point.
And then what about the 2 mil? Yeah.
Yeah. So the 2 mil pod and the 2 million tank is currently the spec that will be under the regulation. I think that there is a strong opportunity, because what the problem, and we're in conversations with the minister's office on this and the bureaucracy as well, is that BC doesn't have a big enough market to get childproof. So they're actually, by going through this reg, they're not going to be able to find the products to be able to supply the market. So we'll have a meeting hopefully next week or no later than the week after to make sure that we walk through. So we don't just tell them things and like say, hey, go look it up yourself. We pull all the laws, we put everything into really detailed packages, and it really helps at a bureaucratic level, because that's what they're looking for, because there are no those child proof tanks right now are law at a federal level. And as we try to work through them, we can't negotiate that and with BC at the same time. So I think once we walk through it with them, they'll understand that there's you can use exceptions, and they have that preview under the ministry.
So federally, and the child resistant tanks and excuse me, was the next on my list, actually, as you could tell, because it rolls right into the next question. So what is happening with that federally? Because there's a lot of people that are concerned that that particular specification now that's been required is an industry killer.
Listen, I'll have to answer this in certain segments, Brent.
Sure, that's okay. I'm happy to ask the question more than once over the course of time.
Okay. So it's a two-pronged strategy right now. Okay. So the first prong is that we believe that the federal government has got this wrong, and we're advocating, but not only advocating on whether the child resistant portion of it is even applicable, because what happens if they cap it at 20 milliliters? I don't think that they understood what they were going for. So if they want to keep levels at 66, the reason that you go for childproof is because it is poisonous, right? At that level of nicotine in say like an 8 ml tank, right?
Sure.
You cap it at 20, it's not poisonous. So what are we even talking about, right? So there's a whole bunch of different sections that we have to fit together with them, and Health Canada has all of our questions and research in hand. So we're just waiting for a confirmation. I'm sure you'll want to do a session on that one too, right?
Sure.
When that comes out. But what I would say now is it's not on the second prong, is that a lot of the international manufacturers are looking at child-resistant tanks anyways. So there will be products, not 2 products or 3 products. There'll be a good selection of products as the industry leaders, and such as Sam, right, who's the largest importer of devices, to my knowledge.
I believe you're correct on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would guess. Like I don't know everyone's market sizes, but I would guess that was Sam. So, but if you look at that, they're not going to leave the industry high and dry. Like they're going to make sure that those products are available. So from Health Canada's point of view, have they given us any indication that they're going to change their mind? No, but they never gave us any indication that they were going to give out that guidance that we got either. Right. And we've been asking Health Canada for guidances for a year and a half. And suddenly now, at this point in time, and that was on the labeling stuff, Brent, with the tags and everything else.
Yeah.
Right. No one could have seen that coming. They never sent one before.
No,
So
that is
to
true.
me,
And I mean, they were kind of explicit, weren't they, in letting the industry know that they don't have the resources to commit to, providing detailed guidance on all these issues when it comes to the regulations. So that was definitely a very bright light that came out of Health Canada with that guidance.
100%. And so I like when I tell you I feel that the pendulum is starting to swing back. Like I mean that. Like I really feel the thaw from what last winter was, right? Which was almost the death stroke to vaping. I will tell you through November, December, January, and February, keeping vaping as a part of Canadian society was on a razor's edge. And now you can see the government's starting to talk about harm reduction, asking for more specific guidelines, asking for more standardization, because that's what government does. So for the people, and listen, I'm not under the misconception that everyone agrees with me and or likes me. But
I got the same problem, Darryl.
But I think what's key here is every industry we look at that's regulated is standardized. That's what they're going to go through. And it takes time. The automotive industry didn't get standardized overnight. Energy didn't get standardized overnight, right? But what happened was, and it goes back to one of your earlier questions, and we'll talk about specifically about marketing, is when we got in trouble is when every parent and we know there's right and left in this country, right?
Yes.
Walks in and they see this stuff just jammed down their throats, because when we're talking about cigarettes, and they played the clip about the Convenience Store Association being upset. You know what? I'm upset with them. Right?
Explain.
My membership is upset with them, because they absolutely marketed this product like crazy, finding users with no education, no understanding of how to sell their product, or really what they were in the business for. And the cigarettes were behind the power wall, Brent. Like, that's one of the comments, or one of the comments that the person made. We have a great track record of selling these products. For sure, you have a great track record of selling cigarettes. Everyone knows that. Then they made you put them behind power walls, and then when vaping came, you have marketed it all again, and then they're making you put it behind power walls. The difference is that you put harm reduction at risk by those marketing practices, and you didn't you didn't care at all. You did not care at all. So the industry was not under attack until all of this stuff happened in 2018, and the feds know it.
So in BC, the retailers, how bad is this going to be for the retailers in British Columbia?
I don't think it's going to be bad. I don't think, listen, it's going to take work. There's going to be a lot of adjustment, right? But you know what? My thing is, ask the people in Nova Scotia, the retailers in Nova Scotia, how it's working for them. So if you have to adjust, right? The government just came out and gave you a win. Anytime the Convenience Store Association and their big tobacco partners come out and give you, like, this is wrong, have a nice dinner with your family and go, you know what? That's okay.
So to let everybody know that we actually have the CEO of the Ontario Convenience Store Association, Dave Bryans, coming back on the show next week, next Tuesday, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to be talking about it because obviously he's got a lot to say. And the Convenience Store Association that was in that CTV piece is the National Association, who's the competitor really of associations. And so it's going to be interesting to get his point of view. I'm not going to, preface too much to it, but, obviously he kind of feels CVA, fought hard for your guys' membership. And so that's good. How is your membership feeling about where you've navigated or been able to fight on their behalf over the last year? And it's been a trying year. So, I mean, I'm not holding your feet to the fire. Simple question.
No. It's a good question. And listen, stressed, right? Yeah. Stressed, tired. And we're only at the start, Brent. Ontario went well. And now we need to leverage Ontario to get successes in other provinces. But you think the CVA members aren't preparing for a fight in Quebec? Of course they are. Right? This isn't easy. We're nowhere near out of the woods. That's why I'm saying, if a government gives you an opportunity to continue the work that we've always done, like if they kept nicotine at 3 milligrams per milliliter, I'd be like, they don't care. It's nothing. They don't give a crap. What they try to do was model after the UK model. Now they've gotten a lot of aspects of it wrong. That gives us opportunities to get it fixed.
Fair enough.
They looked at the harm reduction and said, there's a lot of vapors over there and a lot of ex-smokers, so we're going to do what they're doing.
Yeah, and certainly the news out of the UK has been great. So let's finish off. We're going to finish off my last question, and then I'll let you have kind of a final word to your membership and to the vapors out there. So, but before you do that, here I want to get into this one thing. So we're going to run for another 5-8 minutes or something like that. I think it's really important to have a discussion with regard to BC's intended use of youth to bully other youth to quit vaping. and it's a key part of their strategy, is from the moment they announced it in November, they bring it up all the time. They talked about it on Monday. They're very proud of their youth council, and they're really going to rely heavily on youth to police other youth. And to me, I find that extraordinarily disgusting in my mind, because we know the kind of information that's going to be fed to these youth about vaping. And I mean, it's just poisoning the well of generations of people. Not to mention encouraging coercion from youth amongst other youth.
Okay. So, Brent, like, that's so far out of my
and I think that's
space.
that's a fair response, Darryl.
Yeah.
That's a fair response.
Yeah, it's just, that's really loaded, and I'm not a psychologist nor am I a clinician.
Sure.
But here's what I will sort of, and this isn't going to satisfy you or your listenership at all, but we get asked a lot about youth councils, and that's usually our answer, right? Like, that's not our areas of expertise. We're regulatory and informational based.
Sure.
So, but one of the things that we do talk about is that kids start smoking at a young age, right? I actually started with chewing tobacco. I didn't start with cigarettes. Both my brothers smoked and chewed at the same time. Pretty gross.
Wow.
But it's Berta, baby, right? It's out in the middle of nowhere. So we were really addicted to nicotine, and we used to get the Copenhagen from down in the States.
Oh God, I remember that. Right? Yes.
Yeah, that was back in the day.
Yeah.
God love Montana. So I use this experience in this conversation a lot with government to say, don't assume that the person who needs harm reduction is 50. Right? When you really get down to it, is by the time if you start smoking at 13, 14, right? Like I did. I don't know when you started, Brent.
I'll be quite honest with everybody. I'll let everybody know this. I was 21. I started smoking for a woman. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. Anyhow,
but so my answer to your question is this, is that we can't assume that harm reduction doesn't apply to someone who's 18 in a province that's 19.
I think that's an excellent answer. And, from my end and stuff, it's not really whether, in fact, that answer did satisfy my question, funnily enough. But when I'm putting that question to you, actually, I know that you're not the right person for that question. The right person for that question are the politicians that are, instituting the youth councils and the advocacy groups that, are pushing for them. So I totally get it. And I think that answer was fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. And sorry, I don't want it to be the hard questions at the end. It's just, we kind of navigate. It's just the youth issue, because they are so important in this whole thing. I think we also have to, at least RegWatch has to, look at, how are they being potentially manipulated or worked over, because tobacco control has been doing that for 40 years. I mean, that's their bread and butter, is working inside the high schools and creating these, squads of, of teenagers that don't necessarily allow their peers to just, do what they want. So let's move from that. So as we're looking now, and is where we're going to go, definitely, I'm going to have you back on as soon as you've got some stuff that you want to share. It's important, I think, that you're the only ones that are talking with government. And so having that, pipeline directly to our audience, you've got that whenever you need it. And hopefully it'll be a lot more frequent over the next couple of months. And tomorrow, we have Dr. Chris Lalonde on from the University of Victoria. And we're going to be doing, a whole hour pretty much. We'll talk a little bit about the BC regs, but it's really the whole hour on the research and talking about Dr. David Hammond's correction that he had to make on the smoking stats in Canada. Did you want to leave the audience here with anything with regards to that as we were wrapping up? And we're going to obviously have that tomorrow with Dr. Lalonde.
Yeah, and I don't want to, we put out a very specific press release. I think our opinion on this one, Brent, is it's a drop in a bucket. Unfortunately, in Canada, it's been a major driver in a couple of things. How often does the CDC put out crap and then retract it 3 weeks later and no one carries it? The sad part about this is that this is an institutional failure and nobody nationally is going to pick it up or care.
Right.
So we're going to make a big noise about it. I sent this information to every MLA, MPP, member of National Assembly, and MP. Do you know how many responses I got? Zero. So listen, we have to, as an industry, so I'll go into my close here, Brent, is that we got to stop attacking where we think we need to be justified. And we need to do, and I know that the CVA has changed its direction a lot. And we communicated more this year, Brent, than I think we have in our entirety as an organization. We are very active now.
I think that shows, by the way, that shows. As somebody that watches CVA's communications, I can say certainly it shows.
Yeah, right. And where we're going with this is let's stop feeding into defending ourselves because no one gives us a crap. Like they don't listen to our defense. And we say, hey, look, they lied. Everyone else is off playing soccer in the other field and we're standing there by ourselves. Where we get the attention and we went from a huge negative position in our analytics for communications to in the first time in CVA history to a 12% positive rating from media on responses. The best we've ever got was 0. No. By focusing on the studies that support, focusing on the positives that we bring. So my closing statement is, what can you expect from the CVA over the next 6 months? We're going to work with every government. We're going to communicate 10 to 15 times or 10 to 15 times a week. We have now hundreds of media contacts that we go back and forth with, that we're going to continue to put out the positive messaging of vaping. And we're going to build relationships with stakeholders, not for the next 2 weeks, but for the next 10 years. And that's how we're going to make sure that this industry not only survives, but thrives. And that's what you can expect from the CVA.
Well, that's excellent, Darryl. Well, look, thanks again for coming back on the show, taking some tough questions, explaining things for our viewers, and you're welcome back anytime. And just hang tight right there for me for a second. And just for all of you out there, that is it for RegWatch. And before you head off, go to support.regulatorwatch.com. That's support.regulatorwatch.com, and consider making a financial contribution to our vaping coverage. It's easy. Just dig in your wallet and find a few dollars and toss them our way. We're just approaching our 5th anniversary covering vaping. The whole entire file just started in September 5 years ago. So if you do get a chance to give us a hand, that would be great. And while online, don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.